Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 162 with Luladey Moges.
The reason why my cookbook is a little bit different is also the fact that majority of the people that I know are working individuals who has the 4 hours to make a stew.
None of us.
Yeah. And I mean, and to be honest, as much as I'd like to say that I'm that organized, I don't have all day Sunday to prep and cook for the week, right? I would like to say I do, but I don't. And so if you're not spending all day on Sunday making all these stews for the whole week, then you're going to come home after work and nothing is going to sound good to, hey, this dish takes 4 hours to complete. So the dishes, you can still get the exact same final product without missing any form of the flavors, you can still build the flavors in a shorter amount of time.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to this week's Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. This is your host, Chris Spear. On this show, I have conversations with culinary entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry not working in traditional restaurant settings. On today's show, I speak with Luladey Moges. She's the author of the upcoming Ethiopian cookbook Enebla. Lula moved here to the United States from Ethiopia with her family when she was 12. With this book, she wanted to be able to give readers a really great taste of Ethiopian cooking, but kind of simplifying some of the recipes to make them faster. In their culture, there's a lot of work that goes into some of these stews, sometimes taking hours. You know, it's a big thing that they do on weekends to get ready for the week. But how do you, especially if you are a working person, get these recipes done in a shorter period of time without really sacrificing the quality and the taste? On the show, I talk about how I'm a big fan of Ethiopian cooking, which is why I wanted to have her on the show. And I go to one of my favorite restaurants in Falls Church, Virginia, and I talked to the chef, and I had asked him, what am I missing when I make this at home? There seems to be a real lack of depth. And he said, well, with the onions, I cook them for 4 hours. But who can do that at home? And that was the point of this cookbook. How do you achieve those flavors and that depth without having to cook onions for 4 hours? Having received an advanced copy of the book, I've made 3 recipes from the book so far, and I have to say they are fantastic. They worked really well. And I think people are really going to enjoy this book. If you've never had Ethiopian food, you should definitely try it. I know this isn't a cuisine that people have necessarily in every city. Fortunately, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and they have the largest community of Ethiopian people in the U.S., so we have a lot of restaurants here. So I understand that this could be one of those cuisines that seems really foreign to people. They might think that they have to get all these crazy ingredients that they've never heard of, but that's not really the case. I think, if you can find berbere spice, which, if you can't find it in a shop, you can get online. That's the big thing I think you really have to get. I made a Tibbs dish last week at home, and I used steak. It had jalapeno, onion, garlic, tomato, rosemary. I was growing most of these things at my house. And then just the berbere spice in there. And, this is one of the cuisines my kids really love. I think there's something fun about it, eating with your hands. Who doesn't love eating with your hands? So this is kind of my plea to you to grab this book. The link is going to be in the show notes, and try some of these recipes. I really think you're going to fall in love with this cuisine. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I really hope people who've never had Ethiopian cuisine will consider getting this book and checking out some of the recipes. I really do think you're going to find something that you love there. And as always, you can always connect with me on Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants. And if you want more information, go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org. You can find links to our private Facebook group. You can learn how to get more gig opportunities if you're a caterer, personal chef, or have a food truck. And you can sign up for our weekly newsletter. Of course, this show would not be possible without the help from our sponsors. So here's a message from this week's sponsor, the United States Personal Chef Association. Over the past 30 years, the world of the personal chef has grown in importance to fulfill those dining needs. While the pandemic certainly upended the restaurant experience, it allowed personal chefs to close that dining gap. Central to all of that is the United States Personal Chef Association. Representing nearly 1,000 chefs around the U.S. and Canada, USPCA provides a strategic backbone to those chefs that includes liability insurance, training, communications, certification, and more. It's a reassurance to consumers that the chef coming into their home is prepared to offer them an experience with their meal. USPCA provides training to become a personal chef through our preparatory membership. Looking to showcase your products or services to our chefs and their clients? Partnership opportunities are available. Call Angela today at 1-800-995-2138, extension 705, or email her at aprather@uspca.com for membership and partner info. Hey, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to talking to you. We were just talking before I started rolling about how excited I am for this cookbook. And I think it's time for this. There don't seem to be a lot of cookbooks on Ethiopian cooking, at least not that I could find.
Yeah, that's actually very true. I mean, there are a few. I think the last one that I saw that was published was back in like 2016. But I think the big thing is from the culture point of view, a lot of people just learn from their family, and it's like just passed down through tradition from family and so forth. And also how I learned. And so that's why I don't think anyone tends to actually put something together or thinks of like, hey, this will be something that people will be interested in.
I guess you kind of do it maybe for people outside of your culture, right? Like, does that make sense? Like, I'm sure if you're Ethiopian, you don't need an Ethiopian cookbook, but people like me, I definitely need a template.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like when I was putting this together, to be very honest, my first motivator, besides my multiple friends who are non-Ethiopian asking me for recipes all the time, and I'm like, maybe this is something I need to write down, was for somebody like my sister. I think we were all born in Ethiopia and raised there, but she left when she was a lot younger. And so she didn't get a chance to learn and experience it the way I did. And so I know she loves the food and the culture and she wants to cook it, but how is she going to learn, right? And so it's basically for anybody who is Ethiopian, but either was born in the US or like in the Western world, or just, left too young, like my sister, and would love to learn how to make their own traditional cuisine. And so that was like a market that I was really considering. And then, of course, there's people like you said, that love and enjoy Ethiopian food and want to learn how to make it at home, and not necessarily always going out, but just kind of putting it in the roster of your weekly dinners.
How old were you when you moved to the U.S.?
I was 12. So I was born
Still
in
pretty
Addis.
Young.
Yeah, I mean, true. That's not a lie. I was pretty young, but I managed to start sneaking into the kitchen at a very young age, even though I was not allowed in there. But also, once we moved to the States, culture shock, life change, and because kind of like a little bit of background, when we did live at home, we did have maids. So they're the ones that did all the cooking and the cleaning. And then, my mom was very much involved, she did all the menu planning, and we had parties every weekend. And when that was happening, my aunts would come over and they would, all cook together. And that's when I would sneak in to learn. But then moving to the States, culture shock, no maids.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, well, my mom's cooking by herself now. And then it would be like, okay, no, Lula, go in and help. So that was a great opportunity for me to not only to watch or just look or be able to help a little bit for all the non-cutting hard stuff, but then I was like really involved and learning hands-on.
Now, did you have any Ethiopian community that you were around when you moved here? Like, was there a population, or were you kind of few and far between, for lack of a better term?
Oh, yeah. So, as you know, the largest Ethiopian population outside of Ethiopia is in DC. And then after that, it's in Dallas. And so we have a lot of friends and family in Dallas. So a lot of my uncles and aunts, cousins all lived there. So, it was essentially going from one huge family that we had back home to another family in the States. So, and then there's, the population, it's like there's a huge community there. So it's like from the churches to events and whatnot. From that part of it, it was an easier transition. It's the other stuff that was a little bit harder. So one of them being I didn't speak any English when I moved.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So myself and my younger sister, we actually went to an Italian school back home. So I only spoke Italian and Amharic, the Ethiopian language. My brother went to a different school. He went to an Indian school and he knew English. So he was okay. But I basically moved here and I was in middle school and went from, oh no, you can't attend classes. Now you're in ESL because everything is in English.
Did you end up then having like a Texas accent because you learned English in Dallas?
I do say y'all a lot.
I say y'all a lot, and I'm from like the Boston area. I don't know where I got it.
And that's the thing is I've moved around a lot all over the US. I used to live in the East Coast. Now I'm in the West Coast, and then I used to also live out of the country and so forth. So my accent, I think, is like a combination. I either get you have an East Coast accent, or I get you don't have an accent at all.
Yeah, I don't think I have an accent until I move around and people tell me I have an accent. But I've lived in like 7 different places myself, so it's kind of like a mix of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think your vocabulary just kind of adapts and adjusts based on where you're living. And for me, y'all is definitely one of those things that I can't get out of my, how y'all doing? Like, it's just, I can't help it.
Y'all makes sense. It's you plural. If there's more than one person, it's y'all.
I know, but you'd be surprised, like, especially in LA, people are like, what?
So you wrote a cookbook. Do you have any experience in the food world? Like, most of the people on my show are chefs, former chefs, culinary entrepreneurs. Like, did you have any experience in the food world at all? Have you ever worked in a restaurant, cooked professionally, had anything kind of tying you to the culinary world?
Yes, I've been in the hospitality for over 20 years. And I did work in restaurants. Now I'm still in hospitality, but I'm on the hotel side. But I've been in restaurant world for well over 10 to 12 years. And the last one being when I was living in San Francisco. So, but I'm mostly from like the front of the house. But so I was like, I did everything from hostess to all the way being an AGM, right? So like running the entire show. But with that being said, I worked very closely with my chefs, and a lot of my friends are chefs. And so anytime that it went from events or something would happen, or, hey, we're short-staffed in the kitchen, and I'll just jump right into the line.
That's right. Trial by fire.
Always, right? I mean, you know how it is in the industry where you're like, you just go where you're needed. And so, not going to lie, I kind of miss it sometimes, where I kind of just want to go and stage at a restaurant just to
get it back, right?
just one day. Like, there's something about having a busy day at work, and then like you just pull that last ticket and it's like kitchen closed. It's like this great gratification of like a good service is hard to get in, I think, anything.
Yeah, it's definitely like that adrenaline junkie kind of feeling, right? Like
exactly.
That rush. There's nothing like that. So why write a cookbook? I mean, even if you have experience in the food world, that just seems like a daunting task to me. Like, people ask me all the time, like, when's your cookbook coming out? I'm like, I don't know. That sounds kind of crazy. So
yeah,
I know why you wanted to do it. But just like the process, like deciding that you were actually going to do that. How did that come about and get it going?
In 100% agreement, it is not easy. It was not something that I just woke up one day and was like, typed it up and I was done. It was something I've actually been wanting to do for a little over 7 years, just because every time I cook something and make something, people are always asking me for recipes, or my sister's calling me and saying, hey, I really want to make this. Like, can you just guide me through it or email me a recipe or something like that? And I've always just been like, I need to put this together, and not just for family or for like, in order to like share my culture, because I'm a very proud Ethiopian, and I want people to know that there's this great, amazing food and culture that you're missing out on, and to be able to share it with the world. And unfortunately, I've been in hospitality for so long that my work schedule is usually like 12 to 14-hour days. And, it's a great idea, but when do you have the time to do it? My, I guess, blessing in disguise was when the lockdown happened and I was actually furloughed for like 18 months.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And for people like us, most hospitality or people are A-type, right? We need to be busy. We need to stay busy, because just sitting around doing nothing I think week 1 is all I could do. And then I was like, I need to put all this energy into something. And it was actually my sister that was like, you've been meaning to write this cookbook. What about this is the right opportunity? And then I kind of started doing it, and then it just really got involved. And then it was just 2 years of a lot of menu takes, like testing and everything. Because Ethiopian food, especially the way I was taught, is there's no measurements, right? You do it by look and by taste.
That's how a lot of us cook. I think that's one of the hardest challenges in restaurants in general, not just in cookbooks, is like so many chefs say they cook by taste, right? But then you've got to have a team who knows how to
execute
mimic that. So the same thing with like a cookbook. You got to kind of have that nailed down, right?
Yeah. And that was my issue, was, even like my friends and stuff always say, you measure with your heart. Because I'm like, I look and I'm like, a little bit more. And so just to have to, I'm like, wait, I need to basically give this recipe to somebody who's either never made it or has never even eaten it before, and they need to execute it the same way I would. So to have to like measure every single thing out, there was a lot of testing that I had to do to make sure that if I tell you 4 tablespoons, it really is 4 tablespoons, and so it was definitely a lot of work, but I'm not going to lie to you. A couple of weeks ago, I received my first copy, and having all that hard work, 7 years of dreaming and 2 years of hard work in your hands is one of the best feelings I think you could ever have.
Well, it's a beautiful book. I got a copy of the book in preparation for this conversation, and I am super excited to cook from it. My experience is there seems to be some nuance in there, not your book in particular, but just like Ethiopian food, when I eat it, has so much flavor and depth. You read the recipes, they always look so basic and simple. And even when I follow them, I still feel like, I don't know if it's like that love. Like, I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I make the recipe measurement by measurement, and you eat it, and it's just not as good as like my favorite place I like to go to eat, And I talked to one of my favorite chefs who has an Ethiopian restaurant. He says, in his opinion, it's probably like time. Like that he's like, when I cook down my onions, I cook them for like 4 hours. I don't know. Maybe that's it.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, to be honest, like the traditional, the reason why my cookbook is a little bit different is also the fact that majority of the people that I know are working individuals who has the 4 hours to make a stew.
None of us.
Yeah. And I mean, like, and to be honest, as much as I'd like to say that I'm that organized, I don't have all day Sunday to prep and cook for the week, right? I would like to say I do, but I don't. And so if you're not spending all day on Sunday making all these stews for the whole week, then you're going to come home after work and nothing is going to sound good to, hey, this dish takes 4 hours to complete. So the way I, kind of like your friend said, is the dishes, you can still get the exact same final product without missing any form of the flavors, or you can still build the flavors in a shorter amount of time. And I mean, I guess my proof of it was when I initially started this whole project, my favorite and worst critic was my mother, who, I obviously showed her the recipe and she's like, what do you mean 30 minutes? There's no way. And she's like, no, change that, do it the correct way. And just showed me the, like, telling me how to do it differently. And I was like, okay, give me a minute. And I went into her kitchen and I made the misirwet, which is the lentil stew. And I came out and I was like, Mom, try this. And then she's like, see, much better. That's the way you're supposed to make it. And I was like, no, Mom, that's my recipe. And she's like, oh, then never mind. And so getting Mom's approval was, of course, everything, right? And it's one of those things where I think if you essentially layer in the flavors, and even the shortcuts that I take it doesn't take away from the flavors or the building of the flavors.
And I think that's what's so great about this book, because like many chefs, I think I have a cookbook addiction, right? Like I probably have too many cookbooks and I look at them, but then when it's time to actually make food at home for the week, like I don't have time for that. These cookbooks, I use them more for inspiration, because one recipe is like 4 pages and like 30 ingredients. You know what I mean? Like you get whatever famous chef's cookbook comes out, or, it could be Thomas Keller's book. It's like, I'm not making any of that for my family because it's just like crazy. I want a book that I can cook tonight's dinner and get it on the table. So that's another reason I'm really excited for this book, because my family loves Ethiopian food, and I'm hoping that it's something that I can, bang out in an hour.
And that's the good thing is like, I mean, yes, your family loves the Ethiopian food, but there's some people who don't even know Ethiopian food or have seen it, or like, they're just like, it seems like something so far off and hard. And then they'll look at the recipe and be like, wait, I have most of these ingredients in my cupboard. Like, I just need to get the berbere, which is, that's something that's a staple, as you already know. And you can execute majority of the dishes.
Oh, yeah. I was reading it yesterday. It's like beef. I've got that. I'm growing jalapenos. I'm growing tomatoes. I've got the spices. We just picked up some injera at the market this week. It's like, I'm good to go. There's like
exactly.
we're growing green, it's collard greens I've got, it's super easy. There's nothing in there that's really hard to find.
Yeah. And then that's the thing. It's like, the only thing I suggest when people are doing it is, there's certain things that, obviously you can substitute, but then if it says like Ethiopian butter or olive oil, don't try to use regular butter. Like, don't try to use the butter from your grocery store, because Ethiopian butter is very specific and very different. So if you can't find that, then just use like vegetable oil or olive oil. And other than that, that would be basically the most difficult thing from the recipe. Everything else is just very light and friendly. And, most of it, again, that was by a lot of trial and error, where I would send it. I purposely only sent it to people who were not anywhere near the hospitality world or industry, don't know anything about restaurants or food, because I wanted it to be just like the average Joe who picks up this book and goes, is this going to scare them away? And I would send it to friends, and then they'll email me back or call me back and say, oh my God, this was so great, but this part was confusing and stuff. And that's how I edited and changed it to make it very user-friendly.
So that's great advice for anyone, I think, who's looking to write a cookbook, because that's probably the biggest challenge, right? Is like making sure that your potential reader knows how to make these things.
Yeah. And I think for also like a lot of chefs, I mean, I can tell you, I sometimes want to make a very specific different dish, and I'll call a friend of mine who's a chef and say, hey, send me a recipe. And then they'll send it to me. I'm like, okay, can you send it more like in layman's term? Because sometimes when you're in like your chef world, you're like, kind of get too specific and this, and then you're like, okay, some people are not going to understand this and they're not going to get this. And so just think of somebody who's never cooked a day in their life. Can they grab this book and make everything if they follow the steps?
Now, one of the things I noticed, there can be some spicy food, and a lot of your recipes have like, say, 3 tablespoons of like the berbere, or the sub is like 1 tablespoon turmeric. Like, what about just cutting down to like 2 tablespoons or 1 tablespoon of the berbere? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I completely agree with that. I mean, so I don't know if you got to the part of my book where I talk about my favorite test to do with people, and that's my Taco Bell test.
Right, with the sauce, the levels of the saucing.
Exactly. And so, a lot of people see that and go, really, Taco Bell, what's that got to do with Ethiopian food? That's Mexican or whatever it may be. And I always gauge it by saying, like, listen, everybody's palate is different. Like, I grew up eating this food, so I can literally eat raw serranos and not even blink an eye because that's my level. And there's some people who even find black pepper to be spicy, right? And so you are right. I mean, they definitely can use less berbere and get the same flavor. But now if you make, like, let's say, for example, if you make the sigawet, which is the beef stew, and instead of using the 3 or 4 tablespoons, you only use 1, it will still come out good. It will be flavorful. But then if you go to an Ethiopian restaurant and order it, the food's not going to match, right? So all the recipes are very flexible to a point where they can definitely, you can tweak them based on your palate and your, the way you want it. But if you're looking to make the authentic version, it's just to follow it. But if you're like, I don't even want to mess with spice because the only way to completely avoid the spices instead of using berbere is to use the turmeric, which is in our cultures, you have, like, for example, the beef stew, the sigawet, which is the spicy version, or alija, which translates like mild. And that's the one with the turmeric. And that's why I did it with the 2, because if not, then the book would have been like 400 pages long, being like 1 tablespoon, 2 tablespoons, and so forth.
Yeah, I'm glad that my kids can tolerate spice. It's funny, I have twins. They're 10 years old, and they've probably started eating Ethiopian food when they were like 6. But you go to a restaurant and we order this food, and I think the server's always kind of like, oh, that's spicy.
Yeah, are you sure?
Like we're good. Like, I don't want you to be like, oh, these are like white Americans, like tone it down. It's like, send out everything the way that it's supposed to be.
Like normal.
And then we'll gauge from there. Because we'll get a platter with like 7 or 8 different things on. So, if, not everything is always like blowing your doors off hot. So it's like, there'll be plenty of things to eat on there. And if something's got a little extra spice, no worries. But they like that. The lentils, like, my kids eat lentils from every culture. They would eat lentils every single day, whether it be Indian food. So we love that. So it's like we always have to get double lentils. We'll get 2 different types of the lentils when we eat out.
That's the good thing about like this dish. And I mean, for me, kind of like you said, almost every culture has some form of a lentil dish, right? And so this could be one of those, like, personally, the way I love and enjoy Ethiopian food is with injera, just because that's what we eat everything with. But there's some people who don't even like the flavor or the taste of injera. They find it a little bit too sour or too, like, they don't like the consistency of the sponginess. So that's why in my book, it's like, no, you can still eat it, but eat it with pita bread or eat it over rice. And it's still a delicious dish. But, from like the spice level point of view, like you said, there's such a variety, and as you've eaten already, going to an Ethiopian restaurant, we do love to eat on one big platter, right? With all the different dishes. So you can go back and forth from like spicy, not so spicy, meat, vegetable. There's always a salad. And it's just an overall, like, a fun meal that you can create. Don't have to do all of them, but you can do 1 or 2, and then just kind of build off that.
And I think that's what makes it kid-friendly. Like, I think a lot of people are afraid to go out to an Ethiopian restaurant. Like, they've never had it. Like, I don't have a lot of friends in the suburbs here who go out and try it. And I'm like, yeah, my kids love it. But that whole idea, like, who doesn't love, like, eating with your hands? Like, anytime my kids get to eat with their hands, they hate eating with silverware to begin with, even at home. But, like, that idea of, like, sitting down at the table and just, like, grabbing some with your hands and digging right in, it's fun. And it makes my kids want to eat. Like, they aren't interested in going to some, I don't know, like French restaurant and sit down and eating with a fork. Like, when we ask them where they want to go.
Proper silverware.
Yeah, like that. They want that. And they also like sushi. Now, listen, my kids are not like all foodies. Like, they also hate normal stuff like normal kids do. But like, those are
broccoli.
Those are their favorite cuisines. But I tell people, you should definitely take your kids and just try some, like, what's the worst that could happen? And I say that with all food in general. I'm so surprised every time I meet grown adults who like won't try something. It's like, what's the worst that happens? It's something you've never had. You don't love it. Cool. At least you tried it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm in 100% agreement with you. Like, I'm always always trying out new places, and then if you even give me a remote chance of trying a new cuisine, I'm there. Because it's like, maybe you like it, maybe you love it and it's your favorite thing, or maybe you're like, tried it, not my thing. And then, keep trying more. I just think sometimes people are afraid of the unknown, right? Like, no, I know that if I go to an American restaurant, I know what I'm going to get. But what if I go there and I don't know what they're serving? And it's like, how are you going to find out if you don't go?
And we eat we love the vegetarian. Like my wife and I used to be vegetarians. We eat meat now. But when we first had it, we were vegetarians. And that's one of the reasons we love it is there's so many great vegetarian options. But that idea of a platter where you're not just ordering one dish, like we get a vegetarian platter that has like 5 or 6 things on it. So again, if you don't like one thing, no big deal. There's, 5 other things. So
many other options.
You're going to find something you like. You bring this huge platter, but there's nothing weird on, it's like lentils. Everyone's had lentils, potatoes, collards.
No, I know. And I think I've been asked before where it's like, can you tell me what your food is like? And I'm like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, what do you guys eat? I'm like, just vegetables and stews and stuff. And then they're like, but what kind of meat? I'm like, it depends. Beef, chicken. And they're like, oh, so you guys eat beef? And I'm like, yeah. So I think that a lot of it is either the misconception or the not knowing, and also not trying to find out, because I've taken a lot of first timers to go eat Ethiopian food and they're just like, this is the best thing ever. How come I've never had it? I'm like, been here all along.
That's what I want everyone to get out of this podcast is like how amazing. That's why I was really excited to have you on the show when it was like, oh, wow, I've never had anyone on the show who cooks this, the cookbook. Like, I just want to help spread the word because I love it. And every time I tell people, most of them haven't had it and they're kind of like, what?
I know. Thank you so much. I'm very excited being here. And I think also even when I was like first looking at it and I was like, oh, he's in Maryland? Oh, this is going to be easy. He knows Ethiopian food. You have no choice.
We used to have a restaurant in town. I'm so disappointed. I don't know what happened. They were here when we moved to town, and about 10 years ago, they left. So I don't have anything super close. But I mean, again, DC's like, we go to Falls Church, Virginia, usually for our favorite place. And that's like 40 minutes to get there. So
hey, I've driven hours for my favorite restaurant. So that's just me, though. Like, if I'm craving something and I want a specific thing, distance is nothing. I will make it happen.
And I want to talk about coffee for a second because I find this super interesting. And I'm so glad you put this in the book. So we went to our favorite Ethiopian restaurant a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. The chef took me to the market next door and he buys me this 5-pound bag of green coffee beans. And yes. I'm like what? I buy my coffee roasted in the store. Like, do you guys cook your own coffee? Everywhere in every one of the markets, they're green beans. And it's because I think traditionally, like Americans, we don't do that. I don't know a single person who roasts their own beans. So I got this bag. I haven't done anything with it. And he was like really quickly talking to me. He's like, you wash the beans, you toast them in a frying pan. When they're brown, they're done. I'm like, what are you talking about, chef? Like, I'm going to have to send you a DM on Facebook. So I haven't done it yet. So when I got the book, I'm like, oh my God, there's a thing in here about coffee beans. So why are you starting with green beans? Like, is there not a culture of like having already roasted coffee like everyone else does?
It's not even that. I think the big part of it is, first of all, coffee was found in Ethiopia, right? So coffee's a huge thing in our background. And then we have something that's called an Ethiopian coffee ceremony. And so for us, like you said, in the Western world, when you consider coffee, you're instantly is grab and go, right? Versus for
5 minutes. Yep.
Yeah, less than that, especially if you're like me. I just drink my coffee black. So I don't even need anything. Just pour it in a cup and we're going. But in the Ethiopian culture, our coffee ceremony is not about just the coffee. It's a time like to chat and catch up. And it's a very intimate thing. And it happens on a daily basis where it starts from the beginning, right? Everybody sits around. There's all the pot that you have, like all the little teapots, and then you have the coffee beans that are raw. And you start essentially roasting them in front of your guest and then letting the aroma just kind of build in the room. And the people are talking and Then once the coffee, once the beans are roasted, then you mash it up, usually in a mortar and pestle. If you're trying to speed it up, you can use a blender, but whatever works. And then you boil some water, you put it in the jebena, which is the actual coffee pot, and you just let it, once that's boiled, you let it sit. Again, people at this time are talking, usually having little snacks and desserts or whatnot. And then you brew the first round. The first round gets served. And, also because it's being roasted and mashed and everything in front of you, think of this coffee as like not your regular coffee that you get at Starbucks, but more of like if you've ever been to Miami and you have like the Cubans that have the cortaditos, like the very small, very strong espresso. Yeah. Like that's basically the strength of this coffee. So it's going to be super strong. So that's why even our coffee cups are very tiny, like almost like shot glasses. And then you drink that coffee and then you give back your cups and then you brew the second round and then you do the same thing again in the third round. And then the ceremony's over and everybody can go about their day. And this happens every single day. It's just part of our culture. Like, for example, every time I go home, I wake up in the morning, breakfast is out, the coffee ceremony starts. Once all that is done, then you leave the house. Wherever you're doing, you come home for lunch, and here goes another coffee ceremony. And then again, later on that evening, you have dinner, and then there's the coffee ceremony. And you're always around friends and family and talking and enjoying the coffee. But it's more of like a time to really talk and catch up and spend time with the people that you're with than the concept of caffeine in my hand while I go.
Kind of like, I guess, like Japanese tea ceremony kind of thing, right?
Exactly. So of course, if you wanted, I'm sure they, if you asked them like, can you roast it for me or whatever, they can roast it for you and you can take that. But once you've actually experienced the full thing from beginning to end, from the roasting it to, actually mashing it and then brewing it or whatever, first of all, the coffee's going to taste very different. And then while you're doing all that, you're having so much time talking and catching up. I get it. You can't do that every day in the Western world. But when my entire family's in the DMV area. So when I go home, especially because they're all in Northern Virginia, when I go to my mom's house, that's the one thing I look forward to. To just be able to do that coffee ceremony and just sit there and talk and catch up with her and, my brother, my sister, aunts, and everybody. And just, yes, the coffee is there, but it's more of the bringing us together. And like, as you've seen, like the whole culture is about community, right? So we eat together, we have the coffee ceremony together, and it's all about community.
So you think it's easy enough for me to do, like if I follow your recipe and I should just,
absolutely.
I should just jump right in and make my coffee.
I think you should just jump right in and do it.
All right.
Now, like I said, the only thing is, just remember, it's not going to be the same of like the coffee that you brew from your Keurig. It's going to be super strong. So
okay, I'm ready.
Pace it out so that you're not like wired and missing sleep.
Is there a gateway recipe or two in the book? Like for people who've never had the food, is there something that you recommend like people start with? One or two recipes? I definitely
say like, depending, right? So if you are a vegan or vegetarian, definitely start with the lentil stew, which is the misirwet. I think that is going to be the most easiest segue to just kind of like, hey, I know lentils. I'm familiar with this. It's not like straight into something crazy. And then if you are a meat eater, then I definitely recommend the tips, which is a beef stir fry. And who doesn't love a beef stir fry, right? So,
yeah, and those are both classic dishes. Like, again, exactly. Those are things that I order all the time. I know they're going to be delicious.
Exactly. And so I think, especially for somebody who's never made it or never eaten it before, I think those two, from like the vegetarian to the meat side, those are like two staple dishes that you can start with and then build on. And then slowly
work up to the raw beef.
Exactly. So I would never say, start making kitfo. No, maybe baby step it
My
up.
kids ordered that one time and it was good, but it was a lot because it was like an entree portion and they kept saying like, yes, we really want this. And, I want them to try new things and have experiences. So I was like, man, this is like a lot of raw beef here.
Exactly. Well, that's another thing too. You can always, for future, when you get it, you can say, oh, can we have half of it cooked and the other half raw? So you can kind of like pace it out, right? So that you're not like shocking your stomach with, because essentially it's beef tartare on crack, right? So
I love beef tartare. It's one of those things that I don't make at home that often, but if I go to a restaurant and they have it and it's a good restaurant, I tend to get it. Oh, I don't even think we talked about, what is the name of your book?
It's called Enebla, which directly translates to let's eat. So it's essentially like Italians say mangia. Enebla means let's eat. And it's because it's kind of like another thing, part of our culture, where when you see somebody, you always want to feed them, right? And so somebody walks into your house and you're like, oh, let's eat, enebla, enebla. Or you're sitting down eating at a restaurant and you see somebody walk in and you're immediately being like, oh, please, enebla. And so that's why I thought it was like perfect, because every single thing in the culture and the food is constantly around eating. And whether it be a fun event or, kind of passing by or whatever the situation may be, I just thought, what is the best one word that would capture what our culture is? And that's the one word that I could think of.
I think it's a great name for a cookbook.
Thank you.
And the book comes out, is it October 4th?
Yep, it's actually out on pre-sale on, multiple avenues from Amazon to Target, Barnes & Noble, but it will be out on October 4th.
Well, we link all that stuff in the show notes, so I'll make sure everyone knows where to find this book when it comes out.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
Well, please let me know if you come out to the DMV.
I definitely will.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It has been so great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for listening. This has been Chris with the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org to find our Facebook group, mailing list, and chef database. The community's free to join. You'll get gig opportunities, advice on building and growing your business, and you'll never miss an episode of our podcast. Have a great week.